Welcome to Rotowire Fantasy Football. Super excited today. We're going to have a great show talking some fantasy football. We're bringing in my friend Billy Muzio today. Billy's an analyst, as you know, with full-time fantasy. And the thing that really, in my mind, was like, insane was he's 2021 most accurate preseason ranker in the Fantasy Pros Accuracy Challenge. That is a major accomplishment. And of course, if there's a high stakes league, you can bet that Billy's dominating it. He'll be telling us about that in a moment. He finished third in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament in 2021, second in the 10K FFPC High Society 1 League, the seed 1 in the regular season, third in the 10K FFPC High Society 2 League, seed 2 in the regular season. So consistent excellence. Last year, he cashed $112,000 in high stakes, 90,000 in entries this year. So rolling it over and ready to triple up at least. Yes, including 2022 two 10K leagues of the FFPC and one 10K at the FFWC. Billy, how do you do it?
How are you, man? I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yes.
It's just, high stakes has kind of just been born in my blood. I have a high risk tolerance, I guess you could say, which is kind of, made me kind of strive to do more high stakes leagues. And it just has been part of my process, including doing rankings, comparing my rankings and my projections in early season to high stakes boards. I mean, we're talking about some of the best players in the world, that we're facing. And if I'm missing something, I want to compare it to what other sharp-minded people who have skin in the game, because there's a huge difference to me. People who are actually playing with skin in the game versus people who are just doing projections and rankings. If they're wrong, it doesn't matter. But if you're wrong in the high stakes, it costs you a lot of money. And so I always compare those rankings and those projections to other high stakes draft boards and ADP boards and maybe just ADP lists, and just make sure I'm not off by anything. And if it is, if I can, truly discuss it and talk about it, like there's a few players we're going to talk about today who I'm higher on than a lot of high stakes boards, or maybe I'm lower on than versus a lot of high stakes boards. And if there's a reason that I'm able to kind of, discuss and it makes sense, then I leave them where my rankings are. But if not, if I'm kind of second guessing my thought process or maybe my rationale, then I adjust those rankings.
Yeah, and Billy gets this point. I mean, at some point, we're staking our claim to important leagues, what the group thinks. When we make those moves aside from the field, that's where we separate ourselves, fading the right players, attacking the right players, and not letting groupthink win the day. Now, really quick, I met Billy this year at the Kings Classic Fantasy Expo weekend, and we had the fortune of sitting next to each other in both the auction draft, salary cap draft league, and then the snake draft. And we were, I usually don't talk during drafts, but it was a fun draft. And it was Billy and I, whenever we got near the turn, I was picking 13, Billy picking 14. And it was like we had the same players ranked when we got close to those spots. It was, if I took this player, then, Billy took the player I wanted, vice versa. And we had them so close. We were okay with who we got. So it wasn't really sniping, but it was, we had those players close. And then we talked about it. And the thing that I liked most about Billy is Billy had always that sharp explanation. Because you know me, I'm all about the why. The what, take it or leave it. But I saw Billy was the same way. And that was what got instant respect. And that's why I'm excited to talk to Billy today. And I also got to make friends with him. And I think that was even better yet. Hanging out that weekend was phenomenal. So, Billy, I'm excited you're here. Thank you for being here. The format today is going to be this. Billy comes in with a short list of players. I come in with a short list of players. We're going to go one at a time. We'll talk about the merits of why we like each individual player. And then the other gentleman will come back and either confirm with their thoughts or detract, because our goal is to give you the best information possible so that you can make your best decision on draft day. So, Billy, a player I'm going to let you start out. You're high on this year at cost is DJ Chark. He's tipped right now per ADP data from fantasymojo.com last 3 days, wide receiver 62, pick 150. What are your thoughts on DJ Chark?
So I love DJ Chark, and it's funny to see different high stakes platforms and where the ADP goes. I've been talking about how criminally disrespected DJ Chark is at the FFPC. FFWC now, he's actually in the top 100. Pick 97 is where he's gone as of late. It's also 3 wide receiver starts, so that adjusts things a bit. But there's a few reasons why I love him. And when I talk about why I love him, some of these people who have already, or some of the people who have already followed me know this is inside my article over at the Preseason Pro over at Full Time Fantasy. So this might be some repeat information for those, but for all the new listeners out there, Chark's actually proven it before. I mean, you have to see in 2019, he finished as wide receiver 17 in PPR leagues, right? He was wide receiver 20 in air yards, wide receiver 15 in red zone targets, wide receiver 3 in end zone targets. He was wide receiver number 8 in touchdown that year. And then he slides in right now as the wide receiver 2 for this Detroit Lions offense. I'd even argue that he may be the one this season because I'm lower on Amon-Ra St. Brown, and we'll get to that here a little bit later. But you look at his speed. He's got that blazing speed, 4.34 speed. He's got the height. He's 6'3", so he's a much needed deadly combination, that size and speed ratio that Detroit Lions have been missing since Megatron days. You know, you could say that Golladay had them both, but I don't think he had quite that speed. And then you look now with the offensive line, they got Frank Ragnow back this year, which takes him to, in my opinion, the number 1 offensive line in football. They were number 12-ish last year, I think, according to PFF. And so you add in all that extra time now that they're going to have to throw the ball. And Goff last year already saw the second best, pocket. And so now he's going to see the number 1, most time in the pocket. And I think that's going to benefit Chark as the deep threat. You also have no Jamison Williams until probably mid-November, which is going to be his main, competition in deep threats. And so I think at least to start the season through November, you're going to have, a pretty damn good season for DJ Chark, especially going for, in some leagues, like you said, 150 almost off the board in drafts. So someone who could be a wide receiver 2 in fantasy, a wide receiver 3, top end. So I have a lot of high expectations for DJ Chark. I think that at this point, especially with the cost baked in, there's not much he can do but go up inside of your rankings. And I always look at return on investment, right? I think of high stakes the same as I do with investments. And I say, which player is going to significantly outperform ADP? And for me, that answer is DJ Chark. So I want people to sing it with me for those of you who have kids. DJ Chark. DJ Chark.
I did it, man. I surprisingly, you got me to sing, Billy. I think that's a pretty good trick there. Now, like you said, the whole thing is where you're getting him, because the value, you can't knock that. And the only question I had, and I think with your ADP point, it's moot, but I'm just so worried with Jared Goff. Is he going to hold the ball long enough to maximize Chark's best asset, that deep speed? Because Sean McVay, we saw it in LA. In the beginning of his career, he was getting the ball deep to Brandon Cooks. And then all of a sudden, it was like he wanted to get the ball out. And so McVay had to compress his offense each year, shrink it down until he finally had to ship Goff out of town because he could no longer stretch the defense. And that's my only question. Do you have any thoughts on that, Billy? Because I still think he's a great play, but that scares me a bit.
I do. So if you look back, a lot of people bring up that point, and I think it's misconstrued because you look at the offensive line the Rams had from the beginning of the McVay season up until the point of 2020 after they shipped him off. And in the beginning, it was elite. I mean, the Rams in 2007 had the top 6 offensive line. That year, they went 11-5. They lost to Atlanta in the NFC wildcard game, and Goff was actually quarterback 8 in fantasy points per game. Then you go to 2018, they had a top 5 ranked offensive line. They lost to New England in the Super Bowl, and they were 13-3 that year. Goff was quarterback 9 in fantasy points per game. Then you move to 2019. They were 31st ranked offensive line inside the NFL. They were 3rd in the NFC alone. They went 9-7, and then we saw the stats start tapering off for Goff. He went quarterback 19 in fantasy points per game. So I think it's pretty clear. The only outlier was 2020, where they went 10-6, and they had the 3rd best offensive line, and they lost the division game, and he was quarterback 22, and then they shipped him off after that. So I think it's clear he has inconsistencies, but I think, and that's probably putting it lightly, but it's been also obvious that when he has an elite line, more often than not is he putting up big production. You're talking about quarterback 8 and quarterback 9 fantasy points. Those are good years. And so you add in the weapons and that he has now when he has, So he's got Swift and he's got Hawkinson. He's got Amon-Ra St. Brown, DJ Chark, Jameson Williams coming. There's a lot to like about Goff, and I think that there's even more to like about DJ Chark, who's going to be the deep threat in that offense.
I'll support you with one more point. You brought this up. You brought up that excellent line of the Lions. Taylor Decker graded out per PFF as an 84 pass blocker, and Penei Sewell didn't grade great, but to me, he was a lineman that's going to yet grow a lot. I could see an exponential leap this year, and when you're protected on your ends, that does give you time to step into the throw, take a little more time. So, Billy, overall, I think that sounds like you're going to make some money on this DJ Chark pick. So, yeah, I really like your argument for it, and it's very hard to put any argument. Again, at the cost, that is the whole point. You're not drafting him in the 5th round. You're drafting him much later. That's what it's all about. Billy, player I'm going to talk about here is James Conner. I'm very high on him. I was high on him last year, and one of the main reasons I was high on him was I had seen the prior year all the red zone looks that the Cardinals offense would bring about. And it was Kenyon Drake who was not efficient with those. Kyler Murray will run in the red zone, but they tend to run their running backs a lot more than him. And then you get a 233-pound battering ram in Conner. And I said he was going to, I didn't say he was going to get 18 touchdowns, but I knew it was a big touchdown here. And I still believe they're going to push the pace. Now, when Conner was in Pittsburgh, he did miss a lot of time. I liken that to Pittsburgh would typically see a lot of standard boxes, occasional heavy boxes. And Conner was running into the teeth of the defense regularly, taking a lot of big hits. Now, all that said, we talk about him being injury prone. Maybe. He had a 6-game loss 3 years ago, but his other 4 seasons, 2 and 3 games. Running backs miss game. It hasn't been that terrible. But what I noticed in Arizona is they spread the field a little bit more. And this year at camp, recently, they were back to running the air raid, 4 receiver sets. Now, they may not be able to do that until Hopkins comes. And the reason they couldn't really run that, they had a talent void. They didn't have speed that could stretch vertically. Well, with Marquise Brown, and if they can learn to deploy Rondale Moore out of the slot, they could get 2 speedy receivers and really put together a spread out defense that Kingsbury's not been able to run. That would potentially open more room for Conner and see even lighter boxes. Now, their offensive line isn't good. We know it's actually very bad. They just traded for a lineman today, a guard. It may be a bit of an improvement. Conner had an 82nd percentile broken tackle rate. And when you looked at his receiving numbers in the second half of the season, he was near the top of the running back group in receptions. It was really once Chase Edmonds kind of phased out of the picture. Overall, Conner's going to have space to run. His yards per carry may not be great. But this year, he had Edmonds. This year, I'm not worried about Eno Benjamin. He'll get some work. I'm not worried about Darrell Williams. James Conner, to me, is a player who's not being respected, I think because of the injury concerns. But to me, it's wheels up. Either way, Billy, what are your thoughts on Conner this year?
I like Conner. I like the offense. My only concerns are strength of schedule. It's one of the toughest, I think it's number 2 in the NFL, if I recall. The offensive line is also concerned, which you mentioned. I think they're 25th, 26th roughly in PFF rankings for 2022. And then my only concern off there is going to be touchdown efficiency. Last year, you saw a 7.5% rate, which is extremely high. I mean, he had, just an astronomical amount of touchdowns. And then you look over at the rest of his efficiencies, weighted opportunities and opportunity share all within the top 20, red zone touches as much as he saw in touchdowns. He didn't actually have an astronomical amount of red zone touches. He only had 45 touches last year. So I think overall, though, this offense is going to be more efficient with the addition of Marquise Brown. At least we'll get him through the first 6 weeks at the very least. Rondale Moore is going to take a leap forward. I think Ertz is going to have a pretty big target share at the beginning of the season. And then they're going to get Hopkins in. As long as everyone's healthy, I think this offense should be able to hit the ground rolling after week 6 and really kind of start dominating, which is going to do 2 things. One, pace of play is going to increase, which is going to give them a lot of opportunity on the ground game. It's also going to give them more red zone looks, which is going to increase those red zone touches that I just said that weren't actually that high, considering that he had that many touchdowns. And so I think that everything said and being done, I think he's kind of his cost is baked in appropriately. I don't think he's being overdrafted or underdrafted. I think it's kind of just right now. But it would not shock me. We're in week 7 or 8, and I look up and see that James Conner is the top 10 running back. It's not out of the realm of possibilities. So I'm not going to bet on it, but I'm going to say it's definitely within the cards.
And one thing I forgot to mention, I know Kyler does not run as much as your Lamar Jacksons of the world, maybe your Jalen Hurts, but regardless, he's a threat to run. And even though he has a defense, those backside linebackers still have to freeze a little bit. And when Connor gets that additional moment of indecision, the 3.7 yards per carry is horrible. Bad offensive line, like you mentioned. But that indecision by the linebacker allows him to get the most of what they have. And I do think they'll spread the ball in the red zone. But again, I like all your points on it. The schedule is not easy. There's no question about that. So it'll be interesting to see how James Conner shakes out this year. Billy, the next player that you like this year is Saquon Barkley. And again, per Fantasy Mojo ADP, the last 3 days, he's gone as the running back 8, pick 14, which is right where you got him in the Kings Classic at the turn. You got him right at that turn. What is your case for Saquon Barkley?
Oh man, I love Barkley this year. So I people have been burned by him, and I know that they're concerned. Injuries have kind of derailed his career so far. Offensive line has hindered his career. But there's a few things that really change that here in 2022. One, it's the new coach, it's the new system. We have Dable here in town now, which I think is going to be able to get the most out of their elite talents, and probably going to get the most out of Daniel Jones as well, which is going to spread the offense open and give him some more running lanes. People don't need me here to just break down all of the measurables that Barkley's elite. Everyone knows he's an elite talent. I don't need to go through everything and talk about why he's elite, but things I do want to talk about are their offensive line. So they had one of the worst offensive lines in football last year, bottom 2. They had nobody on their offense that was graded higher than a 62.3, except for Andrew Thomas, who was graded a 78.4. And then when he started missing time, the entire offense just went to shit because the offensive line was just being completely ran through. They were getting sacks. They were getting tackled behind the line. And we all know he had that kind of freak injury where he just rolled his foot stepping on someone. And so back to the offensive line, though. They went out and spent the 7th overall pick on Evan Neal. They put the 67th overall pick on, I can't say this kid's last name. It's like Azudu, or it's Joshua. Yeah. I can't say it.
I struggle with it too.
They spent the 67th overall pick on him. They also went out and signed Mark Glowinski to bolster the interior, which is good as well. So, Barkley he's going to continue to be utilized in the passing game. People forget how elite he is in the passing game. So, that solidifies him as a 3-down workhorse, which is kind of rare in today's NFL. And so you look at everything and say, I think he's got a pretty direct line for success. He's got no real competition for targets or carries in the backfield. He's competing against the likes of Matt Breida, Josh Corbin, Gary Brightwell. I mean, that's kind of gross. And then, it's just, There's not, outside injury, there's not much that you can't like about him. I mean, he's actually my comeback player of the year too. So I've already pegged him that. I have projected for just under 1,100 rushing yards, 8 touchdowns, and another 49 receptions for 388 yards and 2 more scores, and that brings him as my running back number 5 on the year.
When you brought up Mark Glowinski, I always separate the grades between pass blocking and run blocking. And Glowinski was a much better run blocker. He graded out at 70, whereas the passing was a 62. And he was part of that Indy run game. And it is really good to have. The run blocking in the middle, otherwise, with Garcia and Feliciano, not so good. But I think anyway, Barkley's best skill set, if he's against light boxes, he likes to get to the edge anyway. So I think it's a great opportunity. And Brian Dable was literally just crying for a running back to take advantage of the light boxes they saw in Buffalo, and he never got that. So this is definitely his opportunity to shine here, because the problem that I saw, and Warren Sharp pointed this out, in prior years, Saquon Barkley was very inefficient against both 7- and 8-man boxes. He was more than a full yard below the league average in the first 3 quarters of games. He always throws out the fourth quarter because of garbage time, but he was fine against 6-man boxes. And again, the increased talent in the offensive line, like you said. So, I think there's wheels up. Fantasy managers, their question is going to be, is it the injuries? Was it the coaching? A combination of all that saw his yards per carry go from 5 to 4.6 to 3.7. Billy, tell listeners, and you kind of covered it, but just make sure listeners understand that drop in yardage was significant, and even his yards per reception was 6.4 last year. Just confirm them why that's going to be a hoax this year for him.
Yeah, it's back to the offensive line, right? It's just it continues to get better and better and better. Everything they have done is to bolster this offensive line. It's to not only do it from a passing block standpoint, but like you said, a run block standpoint, which is both of them are going to benefit Saquon Barkley, both in his ADOT as well as his yards per carry. If he can stay healthy, which is I think he does this year. If he stays healthy, I could say wheels up for him.
Yeah. Now, the next player we'll talk about is Elijah Mitchell, and the fantasy community does not like Elijah Mitchell. Right now, running back 23, pick 67. And I'm trying to figure out, he missed 6 games last year on 3 different occasions. So that was extreme. It was a lot of different missed time. And I know he had low draft capital. He was a player I was high on right after the NFL draft. I mean, right after the combine. Even with the combine, but there was personal pro days, and before the NFL draft, because I thought he was a player that was going to profile very well. But then he goes after Trey Sermon, and that didn't look so good. But what I liked about Mitchell was this: once he got in the lineup, Kyle Shanahan completely sung the praises that Mitchell understands the run system. And in Shanahan's system, here's what you have to do. You start out with a little bit running toward the outside, and then there's a cutback lane. But the cutback lane is not visible. His running backs have to have a leap of faith. You make that cut expecting that hole is going to open up at the nanosecond you make that cut. And Shanahan could not get enough of that. And so it was difficult for him to hold back Mitchell's carries when he was on the field because he knew Mitchell ran the offense better than anybody. But here's the best argument of all. Jimmy Garoppolo was the quarterback. The linebackers were definitely staying straight up, not worried about him. They were going to be able to attack Eli Mitchell. The addition of Trey Lance changes everything. Yep. The last time we had a mobile quarterback for Kyle Shanahan, his name was Robert Griffin III. Not comparing the quarterbacks, but I'm comparing what happened. And when Griffin was the quarterback, those who are old enough to remember that, we certainly are, Billy, me way older than you, but we remember there were receivers other than Pierre Garçon consistently running wide open down the field. That was one thing. But the second thing was Alfred Morris had an amazing season, and Matt Kelly called it the Alfred Morris corollary. And when you have that mobile quarterback like Trey Lance, the backside linebacker is terrified that instead of the handoff, the quarterback's going to pull it and reverse boot and run 80 yards for a touchdown. As opposed to last year where Mitchell was taking big hits in the middle of the field, which I think contributed to his injury fortune, I believe now those linebackers are going to be on their heels. And Mitchell is a 4.33 burner. And I believe now those 6 and 7 yard runs will frequently become 10 and 12 yard runs. That's what I see. And also, Kyle Shanahan has talked about him in his preseason, how he now trusts him in pass protection. He didn't last year. Mitchell didn't see a lot of third down work. But if he's on the field on third downs, I don't know how much Lance is going to throw to his running backs, but to have him out on the field certainly helps as well. So all that said, Billy, I'm expecting a huge season out of Mitchell. I'm not worried about Davis Price. I think that although he's a power back, I don't know that he's going to acclimate to this one-cut system. What are your thoughts on Mitchell, good or bad?
I like Mitchell. I do. I actually was one of my most owned players last year in fantasy drafts because I was taking that late dart throw in drafts round 19, round 20. Unfortunately, didn't hold them all through week 1, so I had to rebuy with a lot of fab. But that being said, it's pretty clear I'm a Niner fan with a background, so I have a lot of opinions here on Mitchell and Tyrion Davis-Price. It's also known that this outside zone scheme is what it is. The Shanahan run game. It's known as the outside zone scheme for people. It's a single cut. They have a predetermined location on the field where they're going to make that single cut. This is also why we see so many injuries in this zone scheme, is because of that cut, and they get hit exactly. So I think that the Trey Lance piece that you brought up is definitely valid. It's going to keep defenses honest. They're not going to be able to overcommit to runs, which is going to open up more lanes. It's also going to open up a lot more passing games as well. So I like Mitchell this year. I also like Tyrion Davis-Price, though. He's going to fit the scheme very well. He's a one-cut downhill runner.
Think so, yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that there's a reason they went out and drafted him. One, of course, Trey Sermon sucks. And
Sorry.
two, they needed that extra running back because Wilson isn't the poster child of health either. And we saw Mitchell kind of already start to accumulate lower body injuries last year as well. So they're going to need the depth, number one. Two, that one cut downhill running style that Tyrion Davis-Price has is going to fit this scheme very well. So and we've seen him in preseason already kind of looking pretty good, to be honest. So I think I like Mitchell. I think cost is probably baked in right now where he should be going. I could definitely see a scenario where he is going to outperform ADP. I mean, it's the Shanahan system. It's the Niners offense in general. It's going to be, a pretty high pace of play. I think as long as it's all going to come down to Trey Lance. That's I think the bottom line. If Trey Lance can take the step forward and run this offense effectively and not turn the ball over, and they have positive game scripts, I really like Mitchell this year. I think that's where people are concerned, though, is they're not quite confident that that's going to happen. But if it does, I could see Mitchell being, a top 20 running back in the NFL again.
Can't wait to see the 49ers play. It's going to be fun either way. There's no doubt about it. And I like the fact that you like Davis-Price. I'll be interested to see how he comes out and does here, but I'm definitely looking forward to watching him in week 1, see if he can get up that depth chart all the way to the top. And Jeff Wilson, you're right, the injuries. I want to ask you a question, Billy. Do you think that Wilson was recovering slowly from his prior injury last year? And I know he's hurt all the time. Do you think that was why he was so poor last year?
I think that's part of it. It's again also trust. Football's a lot more mental than people think. Like they look at it and just say it's a physical game, but it's not. It's a mental game. And when you're coming off injury, and especially when you rely on those legs as much as these running backs do, and getting hit as much as they do by linebackers, I think that a lot of it has to get over the mental aspect of injury. And I don't think he was quite there, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and I kind of thought the same thing because we've seen him in the past. He is successful in Shanahan's system. He's certainly not an explosive talent, but he understands it and can run it well. So I'll be interested to see if he could get in the mix a little bit this year. Billy, the next player that where you like here is Cole Kmet. Can you tell us why you like Kmet this year? I love him too.
People don't think he's an exceptional talent, and I don't think he's going to come out and be this like Rob Gronkowski or anything. Or he's not someone that's just just blow the top off. He's not really excellent in any metric, but it's going to be opportunity. It's all going to be baked into how many targets he's going to have and what's available in this offense. And you look at this Bears offense in general, they have 217 vacated targets. 41.41% of this team's target share is up for grabs. And what did they add? They added 7 undrafted rookie free agent wide receivers and two tight ends. They literally just throwing on the wall and seeing if it sticks. So for me, you look at what did he do last year, and Cole Kmet ran out of the slot 28% of the time, which was the 5th most among tight ends. He had the 9th most air yards in tight ends with 737. He showed great chemistry down the stretch with Fields, and you look at that usage down the stretch, weeks 12 through 18, he saw 47 targets during that stretch. It's almost 7 targets a game.
Yes.
Total targets last year for his sophomore campaign were 93, 60 receptions, 612 yards. If you had added in just a measly, 3 scores, he's a top 5 or top 15 tight end last year.
Yep.
And so how's that going to happen now? As I always ask myself, if I present myself a fact, how is it going to happen? And that's no Jimmy Graham now in this offense, who was the red zone tight end target last year, where Kmet ran between the 20s. Now him being on the field between the 20s and in the red zone is going to give him that opportunity to score. And so in my projections this year, I have him for 107 targets, so not astronomically higher than last year, which is, again, these are mean projections. I think he could easily smash that number. 70 receptions and 4 touchdowns. That puts him as tight end number 9.
Billy, I saw in the recent preseason game that a very strong play by Justin Fields. He had done a reverse rollout because he was getting insane pressure from Seattle's preseason defense. But when he did that reverse rollout, Kmet rolled with him. I believe it was a 24-yard play down the field. But you could see the chemistry between them. Yep, and exactly. The Bears don't really have a credible slot receiver. I know that Byron Pringle played some slot in Kansas City. They have no credible presence in the middle of the field. And look, the Bears are adding some pieces defensively. This is not a good defense. And they may even trade Robert Quinn if talk goes, into the season, but he's not a world breaker anyway. And their corner play is still emerging. So the Bears are going to be chasing points frequently. And Justin Fields, we mentioned earlier, he's going to be under pressure, but his mobility is going to allow this to work. It's going to be all about, we'll talk about Mooney in a bit. It's going to be all about Kmet. I don't see a world where Justin Fields doesn't throw the ball close to 560 to 575 times because they're going to trail that much. They can't go into run mode. So I'm with you completely on Kmet. Here's the question I'll ask you, because I have plenty of shares of Kmet myself. Dallas Goedert in the 6th or 7th round, or Cole Kmet in the 9th or 10th round. Would you be torn between those two, or would it be Kmet all day long?
My ownership says Kmet. I am like at 30-something percent Kmet. And now his ADP has significantly rose. And we saw early drafts. He was going around 13 and 14.
Yes.
And when I say early drafts, folks, I'm drafting in March. Right?
Yes, you are.
Now you look at those and you're able to find trends, and you're able to find weaknesses, or I should say exploit, variances in ADP, and then they eventually catch up. And so now we're seeing Kmet go in the 9th round, the 10th round at times, but usually that 9th round. And so I've cooled off on drafting him simply because I own so much in the 12th and 13th round. But I'm going to say I'm going to take Kmet even over Goddard on cost, base. In projections wise, I have 1 at 8, 1 at 9. So they're right there in projections. And anytime I can take the latter at ADP and get a very similar, output from production standpoint, I'm going to do so.
And Billy, I believe from a roster construction standpoint, I want to hold off on my quarterback and my tight end as long as possible, except for the Kings Classic where we have 3 flexes and I can flex them. But anyway, long story there. But no, exactly correct. Kmet allows you to build your running back and receiver room and get depth there. And that's where we need the depth. And we believe in Kmet. So you may be a little more heavily invested than I am, but I'm getting him whenever I can because, again, the Bears are going to throw and it's a 2-man game, which leads me to my third player, Darnell Mooney. How many Bears do we want on our team? That's what scares me.
Only 2.
Yes, exactly. And that is the point, Billy Muzio. Right, there's 2. It's such a narrow target tree that why not? They're going to throw, like we said, and they're not going to have other options. So let's talk about Mooney here. And right now, last 3 days, wide receiver 31, pick 61. And he had a second-year breakout last year, but as a rookie, I remember in week 1, he was lined up as the left outside receiver as a rookie. Now, it's not like the Bears had a world-beater roster, but the fact that this rookie was in there right away, it showed something. And we started to wonder, all right, well, he's probably profiling as a situational deep threat. But as I watched games last year, it became very apparent he may not run every route in the tree, but he runs most of them very effectively. I was surprised to see the amount of times he would go over the middle. No problems at all working with his quarterback, Justin Fields. And last year, understand this, who was the quarterback in training camp, Billy? Andy.
Oh, that's right. Yep.
Right? We had Andy Dalton. Well, Darnell Mooney didn't even get to work with his quarterback because Fields wasn't the starter, but having a camp to work with him. And we even saw, again, just very small sample size in the preseason, but we saw right away the chemistry is still there. Later last season, teams started to realize that Allen Robinson wasn't going to be a thing in the Bears office, and Mooney was. Defenses started to adjust to Mooney. Yet Mooney had 3 of his 420 or more yard games after the Week 10 bye when defenses were looking to stop him. And he had 3 double-digit target games, 13, 16, and 16 after that bye week. That was when Justin Fields had some time to acclimate. It was all coming together. So for me, and we love Mooney's, as a matter of fact, his yardage after the catch, 71st percentile. And the target share, 26.8%. It was 98th percentile. And there is less competition, if even possible, than there was last year. Robinson got his few targets, but there is nobody competing for work. And I don't think defenses are going to be able to stop Mooney. What do you think about Darnell Mooney, Billy?
Oh man, I've been touting Mooney since March. I love Darnell Mooney, and it breaks down to opportunity. I mean, we talked about the vacated targets that were here. We talked about how many, non-wide receivers they have. I don't even count Brian Pringle or Velus Jones really. You look at like the amount of targets and receptions when you do the math and actually like calculate it all, it's minuscule compared to what Cole Kmet and Mooney are supposed to get. I mean, I have Mooney from at 28.38% target share, 145 targets, 90 receptions. And that's honestly probably light. He saw 140 last year with Allen Robinson on the field. He realistically could probably see 155, 160 targets. So I have been nothing but high on Mooney this entire season, this entire offseason. And we talk about, the offense and the coaching changes. And my only concern after watching preseason is the offensive line. Are they going to have enough time to get the ball to Mooney down the field and let a play develop? So I want to see what happens in this next game and see if they're able to kind of, figure that out, because that line didn't look, he was getting pressured like every play. So that's my only concern. And I think that's the only thing that's going to derail Mooney is going to then be able to get him the ball.
Yes. Now, you mentioned the third preseason game. Unfortunately, I just read the USA Today, the Bears coverage. The Bears starters are not expected to play in the preseason finale. I had to turn that in the Rotowire as a player notes. Right. But unfortunately, because I would have liked to have seen a little more like you, Billy. But like we said, at least we saw on occasion they're rolling out fields. And I think the offense is going to be predicated on that because they understand they can't get him killed back there. And the only way out is to roll him out. And then if he rolls out enough, there are plays where he won't roll out and the defense is expecting it. They may not be even sending an interior rush. So let's hope they could trick the defenses for a while and cash us in on our Bears investments. Now, I always am hesitant. I want to put the name on Velus Jones as Grandpa Jones, the 26-year-old rookie. One day I want to call him that, but I'm trying to refrain from that grandpa. Anyway, there are some players that Billy and I are against cost. Billy, your first one that you're against cost on is Joe Burrow of the Cincinnati Bengals, currently going as a quarterback 7, pick 90. Again, Fantasy Mojo, high stakes ADP in the last 3 days. What are your reservations against Joe Burrow?
People have been attacking me for this, and I'm going to say, don't get me wrong. I love Joe Burrow, and what he did down the stretch was anything short of spectacular. But that's also one of the reasons why I don't like him at cost this year. I just can't get behind what it takes to acquire him in drafts. I mean, in beginning, it was going in as a top in the top 6 picks in the beginning of drafts. He's starting to slide down. He's now in the 8th, 9th range, right? And so he was going ahead of Tom Brady, going ahead of Jalen Hurts in the beginning of drafts, going ahead of Russell Wilson. And that's all adjusted now. But you look at their strength of schedule again. I'm always going to go back to strength of schedule. Yes. And it sits the third toughest in the league. It's only behind the Cardinals and the Rams. We also need to consider his fantasy shootout schedule. When I say shootout for folks, it's the fantasy playoffs, weeks 15, 16, 17. Okay, he faces the best of the best. He's starting with the Bucks, the Patriots, and then the Bills. Those are very tough schedules for quarterbacks. Then you look at his success in 2021, and we can't help but think there's going to be a regression here in 2022. He led the league in completion percentage of 70.4. He was 8th in the league in touchdowns, 6th in the league in money throws, 3rd in the league in touchdown rate at 6.5%, 8th in the league in deep ball completion percentage at 43.1%, 2nd in the league in passer rating, 3rd in the league in accuracy. And I know you're saying I'm making the case to draft him. This is wonderful. This is amazing. But regression. That's the caveat. It's a monstrous season. And even after that monstrous season, he only finished as quarterback 8. What does it need to happen now to outperform those stats? And where's he going to land inside this year's quarterback standing? So in order for him to outbeat that production and to outbeat the cost it takes to acquire him, he's going to need several elite quarterbacks to either, slip and have regression as well, or he's going to need to outproduce every single one of those amazing, stats that I just mentioned, which in my opinion is going to be hard to repeat alone. So at cost, I'm out at Joe Burrow.
Billy, I love your case on him as well. I'm going to try to just give you a little bit of the background of why I'm in the other camp about him. So what I noticed, if we look at Joe Burrow's full season, it's a misnomer because the team didn't go pass heavy till week 13. I felt they weren't confident in his knee. I think they were very careful. We had 3 games where Joe Mixon was getting 28 carries. I don't think he sniffed 19 the rest of the way, but it was very a concentrated effort to get him throwing. And in those last 6 games of the season, when they went pass heavy, 5 of those with 300 yards, a 446 and a 525. In his completion percentage in week 14 through 17, they didn't play in 18. That was the Bengals game. They had nothing to play for. He had a 75.8% completion percentage. Now, what I noticed was this. The first time Jamar Chase played the Ravens, the Steelers, and the Chiefs, Jamar Chase went absolutely nuclear. The second time he played those 3 teams, he was much more subdued. But what I learned was this. Burrow already knows, and the coaching staff knows, they're going to see the same too high shell treatment to try to limit those big explosive plays. But then we saw in the playoffs, Cincinnati figured something out. That Jamar Chase, they don't have to run him on deep routes. He literally can line up in any position. He can run any route. And they started to get him the ball in space underneath because the too high shells were giving room underneath. And so Jamar Chase isn't, obviously you know this, isn't just a deep threat. He's way more. And then we have T. Higgins. T. Higgins had a shoulder injury last year, and I know he's struggling with a little bit of that now, but he really got out of the gate slowly. I believe they have 2 alphas who are nearly uncoverable, and I believe they both can excel in what the too high shells are going to give them. But then if defenses go all out to stop them, they still have Tyler Boyd, who's an excellent slot. And honestly, I think Hayden Hurst with room just to walk around the middle of the field when obviously the defenses are worried about everybody else, Burrow's going to have opportunities to find them. But one more piece. I know the offensive line additions aren't going to make them an elite line, but it might make them an average line. And Joe Burrow, think of how often he had to get the ball out like in a nanosecond before he got creamed. This year, he may actually have time to go through progressions. He may have time to work full routes with Chase and Higgins. So my optimism is that the first half of the season isn't what we're going to get. They've made adjustments. Any merit to that, or are we just going to agree to disagree on this?
I think you have valid points. I think the offensive line is probably the best point because you look at down this, and I just want to say the offensive line is definitely going to be improved. I think they're probably going to be middle of the pack, that like 15 through 18, rather than the bottom 3, which is where they've been. But in terms of what he did down the stretch and into the playoffs, outside of playoffs, his let's just focus on after the bye. So let's say weeks 11 through 18. Okay, those secondaries are trash. They faced Vegas, Pittsburgh, Chargers, and that I don't think that they had Derwin James healthy that game. They faced my Niners, who have a horrible secondary, or did last year. Denver was the only one who had a good secondary. Baltimore had like practice squad guys in the secondary. KC anyone who can throw against KC because they're always playing, just shootout games.
Right.
And then Cleveland was the only one that had a decent secondary. So you're talking about every single one of those games with easy secondaries. And none of those games, except for the San Francisco and Denver, really had an outstanding pass rush. Cleveland also did, but the rest of them were pretty mediocre at best. So I'm going to say again, I know people are saying there's a lot of comments in here talking about strength of schedule being a bit overrated, but that just shows that strength of schedule down the end was favorable towards the passing game and the wide receivers, which resulted in significant output in the fantasy world. And so that's not the scenario this year. And I want to talk, there's a comment in here talking about that schedule being a bit overrated. And strength of schedule, some people may think it's overrated, some people not, but you got to think most of these strength of schedules, you're facing teams that are better. 2, they're better for 2 reasons. One, either the offense side of the ball or the defense side of the ball. And in some of these scenarios, both. And I think that's what the Bengals are going to see is players that are going to be, or defenses and offenses are going to be better on both sides of the ball here in 2022.
Now, Billy, with strength of schedule, a lot of people are unfamiliar in some ways. Like Warren Sharp uses a very progressive model where he's looking at projected win totals and player changes, where a lot of lazy sites will just use metrics from the prior year. And when you're talking about it, I already know that you're using something similar to Warren Sharp. Can you explain?
Yeah, we're looking at not only like the fantasy points that team gave up last year, but also the changes they made at offense and defense this year, whether they're draft or free agency. And we look at, the scores that those individual players had, either whether in the secondary or whether it's, against the rush or whatever it may be. And then you're taking in their schedule for this year and who they're facing and how those players did versus man coverage versus zone coverage, and you're creating a strength of schedule. So we have a tool at Full Time Fantasy that breaks down and has all that algorithm is based in there, and you can either sort it by weeks. You can do it, partial weeks 1 through 5, 6 through 10, 11 through 15. You can do it just playoffs by week or by shootout schedule or the entire season. So, and it's broken down by position. And so I'm a huge believer in strength of schedule when it breaks down, when you do it right. If you just look at it and, like you said, are being lazy about it, okay, it's overrated. But if you're actually doing the calculations and the math and adding everything up, there's a lot of merit to it.
Yeah, and I wanted to point that out for all the listeners, Billy, because it's important to understand. Because I think, like we said, I think some people just make some assumptions, and that's okay. But yeah, guys like us, we do our work different ways, and you can tell when you hear Billy and I talk. But we both definitely go way beyond last year and the obvious to try to find these out. Because we've got to get an edge on people here, and we're trying to help you find those same edges. And at Full-Time Fantasy, I've always respected the team over there. You guys do a wonderful job. So definitely another good company that I put near the top of the heap. Now, Billy, another player, this is the shortest case I'll make. I am pretty much out on Dalton Schultz this year. He's going as a tight end 6, pick 46. Now, that's a little skewed because they're tight end premium league. So I'm just going to say tight end 6, the pick number depending on one tight end league. So let's just say tight end 6. My argument is real simple. I'm a film guy, okay? Last year, it was very apparent that Dallas's opponents were very concerned about Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. They made it a point to do anything to try to slow them down, bracket if possible, but the middle of the field was often left unattended. There were so many plays where Dalton Schultz was not even looked at. He literally would frequently catch an open 10-yard pass, nobody near him, get some yardage after the catch, and he did well. The results were great. But my concern for this year, and he was 42nd percentile yardage after the catch, and that was with frequent room to roll. Now, with Amari Cooper gone, and look, I like Jalen Tolbert, but defenses are going to come in, and when they're game planning, it's going to be try to slow down CeeDee Lamb, and now Dalton Schultz is probably the number 2. The argument fantasy managers are making for Schultz are his last year numbers and the fact he is the number 2 in the offense. I contend that he is not anything near an elite tight end, and if he is actually covered as a decent tight end should be, I don't think he's getting loose, and I think Dak Prescott is going to check down to a receiver or someone else. So Schultz will still be a good tight end. I think he could be a tight end 9 is a big difference from tight end 6, because when you get in the tight end area, it's really if you're in that top 4 or 5 or so. So I expect he'll get some targets. He'll get decent yardage, but only 650, not the 800 and change he had last year. What are your thoughts on Dalton Schultz, Billy?
I think this is our biggest disagreement we have since we've met. It breaks down to opportunity for me. So I think it's very similar to like what we just talked about inside Chicago with opportunity share and what's going to become available. I do think that the absence of Amari Cooper is going to hurt this offense, and also not having Gallup on the field for the first couple weeks. That being said, I think they finally figured out how to utilize, both their running backs, and Pollard is going to be probably moved around the slot a little bit more, which is going to open up CeeDee Lamb to kind of run out wide more. And so I think that you're going to see a different offense here in 2022 for the Dallas Cowboys. I would not be surprised to see more 2 running back sets, but I would also not be surprised to see a little bit more 12 personnel. That being said as well, I think you're going to see even more targets. So last year he was number 6 in the league in targets, 104, right? I think that's probably the light side that we're going to see this year for Dalton Schultz. Everything, all of his metrics, he was, he's going to be, top 8 in snap share. He was, top 10 in slot reps, top 5 in routes run. So those are, again, tough metrics to have to beat this year, but this is the offense that threw the ball top 10 in the league last year. I think they're probably going to do the same here in 2022. You got to look at the division they're facing, and there's not really an amazing defense that they have to face on a week-to-week basis, or I should say twice a season, not week-to-week, sorry. But I got to agree with you that I think that Dalton Schultz is going to have more. He's going to have to beat more coverage, but where he did well last year was yards after the catch. So he's tied in 6 in yards after the catch. I think that they can, increase that this year. I think that he showed that he was capable of that role. I just think that in general, the pace of play is going to benefit this offense, and I think that Dalton Schultz is going to continue to capitalize on that. I do have him as my tight end 6. I think a real case could be made for him to be a top 5 tight end. I'm still going to stick to the top 5 though, and have go to Kittle and Waller up there.
Sure.
But I think that given their strength, also I keep saying strength of schedule. They actually have the easiest strength of schedule in the NFL. They're 32nd, and their playoff schedule again also the easiest. I don't have it right here in front of me. I want to see if I do actually. Dallas plays the Jaguars, the Eagles, and the Titans. So it's that's going to be the fantasy schedule for the shootout. So I really like Schultz this year from an entire NFL schedule wise. It's the one the easiest, even at the tight end position. And I think overall, I think that he's going to have a pretty good year. So the only thing we've really disagreed on in the last couple of weeks that we have talked about.
Yes, and this is the whole point, though, Billy. I always say I have no monopoly on the truth. We have strong takes, and that's what fantasy players expect from us. We're going to unload our bag of tools and what we say about a player, and fantasy managers can make whatever decision they think works for them. But no, I respect the opinion. Hey, I've been wrong a ton of times. I'm in this business a long time.
All have.
Every year I'm wrong a lot. So no, I love the take that you make on them. It makes sense, and the fantasy managers listening can definitely go their route. And by the way, a lot of great questions, but I've got Billy on as a guest here, and the time is going to be very valuable for Billy. So if you want to come on my stream later tonight, I'm glad to answer questions, but I can't put Billy through this right now because we got to take care of business. Billy, the next player.
We can get to questions at any time. I allotted an hour and a half today. So
okay. So then what we'll do is we can scroll back later, but we're gonna get through what we're doing, and then if people need to bounce out, they can. All right. So Billy, the next player that you have listed here is that you are undervalue on, you don't like as much as Deebo Samuel, who's going as wide receiver 7 last 3 days, and per Fantasy Mojo ADP Darren Armani. Did you meet Darren at the Kings Classic?
Yeah.
Love Darren. Darren.
Good guy.
Yeah, and pick 20. So, Billy, why are you out at Deebo this year?
So, I think it's important for people to know first, I had Deebo ranked ahead of Brandon Ayuk last year. Okay, I was taking him in drafts in round 9 and 10 like clockwork, just because you're not going to draft someone in round 5 if they're going in round 9. It doesn't make any sense. And so my projections, though, had Deebo ahead of Ayuk last year. It was based upon the system. This year, I have it reversed. I actually have Ayuk ranked ahead of Deebo in terms of fantasy points. It's close this year, very close, but I think that we're going to see a significant drop in production from the ground game for Deebo. Okay, he already expressed his displeasure of running the ball in this offense, and you look at his damage that he did last year. He had 59 attempts, 365 yards, and 8 scores on the ground. I mean, 8 scores as a running back, as a wide receiver, is just astronomical. So let's just, I always like to say what if scenarios, okay? So I always go back through and look at my projections and say 8 scores is not going to happen again on the ground this year. So let's just say his running efficiency, let's just cut it in half, okay? And that's a little steep, but it's probably realistic. 200 rushing yards and 4 scores. Okay, well, how is it going to drop this much? Well, 1, he's got a rushing quarterback now who's going to be utilized in the red zone. 2, this quarterback also likes to throw deep, who's going to benefit Brandon Ayuk. Okay, 3, he's not going to have the efficiency that he had running the ball that he did last year. So let's just say that drops 10%. If you added all that into the equation, that puts him as wide receiver 13 last year. Okay, so back to his efficiencies. As a wide receiver now, he was 41st in routes ran. So again, he wasn't being utilized in the route game as much. He was 29 in snap share, 78 in average target distance. Okay, he's being thrown behind the line of scrimmage and letting him do Deebo things. That's why he's Deebo. He's the yards off the catch king. Okay, but then you look at red zone. He was his 44th most targeted red zone in the wide receiver in the red zone. So again, not being targeted in the passing game. Okay, 43rd in deep zone targets. Right, so this new scheme isn't going to fit him as well. Now, I think it's going to significantly benefit Brandon Ayuk, right? I'm not going to say right now, again, these are mean projections. I'm not going to go out and say right now Brandon Ayuk is going to outscore Deebo, because if I do that right now, people are going to attack me because, Deebo Samuel is such a boss. I get it. I love Deebo Samuel. I love my Niners. I'm just saying that we're going to have some really, really significant, regression, especially in the running game. And you add in all these metrics I just talked about, and him not being targeted, and him not being, the deep threat in this offense. And I still think they're going to get him involved. I'm not saying they're not going to involve Deebo. They're going to find ways to get involved. They just paid the man, damn near $30 million. So they're going to get him involved. But it's not going to be at the same level that we saw last year, because we saw they established the run game. They just drafted another running back. They don't want to have to put him back there if they don't have to. So I think don't get me wrong, they'll still utilize him in that scenario, but it's just not going to be as much as we saw him. He was getting like 6 to 10 carries a game last year. It was asinine, and that's why we saw him get injured. So they're not going to want to put him in that situation. He doesn't want to be in that situation. And you add in that rushing quarterback, and there's no need for him back there. So I'm out at cost. I still love the player. I still love him and his electric ability. I just don't think we're going to see it as often this year.
Billy, I can't agree with you more. And I want to say, I can't substantiate this, but I could almost promise you that during the negotiations of that contract, part of Samuel's speech was, I am not carrying the ball as much, because that was his argument. And he knows it shortens your career, taking those bigger hits. Also, and he's going to want another contract down the road. And when you run the ball, you're less valuable to a team. Shanahan could use him that way, but other coaches aren't going to use him that way. I want to add one thing to make your argument even better, too. When we talked about his usage last year, in the first through week 9, he only had 4 rush attempts and 81 targets. From week 10 to 18, 55 rushes and only 40 targets. Yeah. It was insane down the stretch, right? Now,
it was like it was funny. I kept joking around saying I have my wide receiver. Why can't I play my wide receiver at running back? Because I had teams that were just so dire in need at running back. It's like, man, he's running the ball more than a lot of these running backs are.
I wondered how he didn't get running back classification, because I know every run wasn't out of the backfield, but he had enough of them, and I thought he should have had dual classification. Cordell Patterson is running back only, and he was a receiver as well. So anyway, we'll not argue about that, but but overall, I agree with you completely on that. And the other thing I want to add, look, Trey Lance, his strength is his deep arm. I don't think is a precision, timing, and rhythm quarterback. And a lot of those throws that Deebo Samuel requires, now some of them are so quick it doesn't matter, but I think that the timing and rhythm throws, they're not going to be able to have those as much. And if they're going to use boot action, it's going to be a lot of downfield stuff. So like you said, Ayuk is the guy, because those are in the sweet spot. And those two both, and I'm saying Ayuk and the quarterback, Trey Lance, they worked very much together off the practice field together to develop that chemistry. And so, yes. And last year, you had Deebo ahead of Ayuk. I can't say who it was, but we had a partner in our company we shared rankings with, and we had the same thing. We got yelled at by them, and we were asked to make a correction. And when the season was over, now we'll say, we're not going to make that correction.
We're not making
for you
that
again.
Correction ever again.
No, ever again. So, yes. Yeah. All right. So we are both out, Billy, on Deebo Samuel, and it's not even close based on his ADP. Like you said, we love the player. He's going to have many highlight reel moments, but just not enough of them to merit that ADP. The player I'm out on next, Billy, is Travis Kelce. Look, I know he's an amazing player. He's going to turn 33 years old the first month of the season. Now, we know his career low yards per target was because teams went too high. Everything got compressed. We understand the reason why. So he's 8.4 yards per target. It was down a half a yard and from 5 in the previous 7 years. But his yard has dropped a full 200 yards below his prior 3-season average. He was a 1,300 type yard tight end, and he was down to 1125. And the big thing was, it was the bad games he had. He only had 2 games in the prior 2 years with fewer than 50 yards. He had 6 of those last year. So Travis Kelce, for the first time in his career, had a floor, a bad floor. Now, the aging is going to come into play here. The thing that defenses did and why he had those bad games, teams started beating him up at the line. They started getting linebackers hitting him. Because they were getting Tyreek Hill compressed because of the too high shells, they were able to do more. They wanted to punish Kelce. To me, Kelce doesn't like getting hit. He likes dishing out the contact to defensive backs. He doesn't want to be in the war. And you could tell he was not the same aggressive guy. Now, in the playoffs, he went off. I understand. But this said, Tyreek Hill's gone. The defenses are going to come in. They are not scared of any of the players there. They're not afraid of Juju. They're not afraid of Marquez Valdes-Scantling. They're not afraid of any of them. Defenses are going to come in, and they are going to say, you know what? Patrick Mahomes loves Kelce. We are taking him away. We're going to make him be uncomfortable. And they want Mahomes to throw downfield because that's when they actually can get mistakes against the too high shells. So that said, that is why about the aging, the decrease in production, the attention he's going to receive, they're going to force they're going to force Mahomes to go elsewhere with the ball. As tight end 1, no. Tight end 3 or 4, fine. He'll never get there. Billy, your thoughts on Travis Kelce?
I'm out at cost. It's funny you mentioned this because I'm actually out on Mahomes as well.
Same.
And you brought up a lot of reasons why. There's so much turnover at the wide receiver position, and you look at what they did last year. Like, they ran cover 2 versus him. They forced him to kind of dink and dunk their way down the field. They took away the big playability from them. I think that continues here, though. It was interesting to see that they went out and kind of signed 2 players to do, Tyreek Hill's job. Juju's going to run out of the slot, which is also going to affect Travis Kelce, right? You have MVS, who's going to take that deep threat ability that was inside Tyreek's bag. So there's going to be more mouths to feed per se, but there's also going to be more timing concerns and more rhythm and issues and them getting on the same page. So I think it's very safe to say that this offense is probably going to maybe not underwhelm, but struggle, I would say, for the first maybe quarter to half of the season. Kind of what we saw last year, right? If you drafted Mahomes in the early rounds, you felt the pain the most, and you said, this is not the Patrick Mahomes that I drafted, because defenses wisened up and started playing that cover 2. So I think that having all these new additions in wide receiver, having the MVS, having the Sky Moores, having the Jujus, I think all that's going to take time for them to get on the same page and get the same rhythm. And I think it will affect this overall offense. And I think it does eat into the, Travis Kelce target shares a bit. The only thing I've been kind of going back and forth on my head about is, how much more are we going to see in the red zone with Travis Kelce? How much more are we going to see on third downs with Travis Kelce, because he is the trusted target? Now, you brought up the point that defenses are just going to hone in on him because of of that reason. So I think if he can overcome that, I think he'll have, another good season, but he's also to that point in his age where his age is starting to come into play for a tight end, and he might start to see some inefficiencies in the game. And, so I've been on the fence. I'm not quite ready to rule him out completely. I think that I'm still buying. At cost, it's hard, but if he drops, I'll take him. But he's not one of the players I'm going to say he has to beat me. Like, there's players that I refuse to draft, and I'm going to say he has to beat me. Travis Kelce could easily beat me, so I'm still going to take shares of him, but I'm just not overly confident when I do so.
No, and that makes sense as well. Billy, I know you have another player, but since I'm the Chiefs, my last under cost is Patrick Mahomes. So let me just tie into that one, then we'll come back to your last player. I think it's just a natural segue point.
Yeah.
Mahomes is going as quarterback 3. Obviously, Justin Herbert has surpassed him as the quarterback 2. And I still think, to a degree, we're still paying for that 50 touchdown season of 4 years ago. Since then, 26, 38, and 37. Good numbers, but definitely not what we remember Mahomes being capable of. And the 5,000 yards he hit that season, he hasn't hit that since. And we look at last season, and look, he adjusted the 2 highs a bit, but they were still not the fantasy results we want. We want a good number of spike games. He didn't even hit 270 yards in 6 of his last 7 games. In 12 of his last 16, which was almost the whole season, 12 of those 16, fewer than 280 yards. And listen to this, touchdown passes, right? His staple. 2 or fewer touchdown passes in 10 of his last 13 games. It was not good. He was not an effective fantasy quarterback. And matter of fact, if you had a good backup fantasy quarterback that you just happened to draft, odds are you were considering starting him over Mahomes in the second half of the season, because Mahomes was not giving you ceiling games. When he played the Raiders, who played the Gus Bradley defense, and they made no adjustments, he killed them. And I played him in DFS that week, but that was it. And now we talk back to the Tyreek Hill being gone. Tyreek, and I know Marquez Valdez, Scantling, field stretcher, I get it. Not Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill scares defenses. He forces them to do things they would not want to do. There are different rules they have to play with them on the field. And so, again, I saw the preseason game yesterday, and this spoke to me. I assumed this season they were going to come in looking to try to get that short and intermediate game going, and then maybe mixing in something downfield, a shot play. He was going bombs away against Washington. He took 2 hits in limited time. And 2 deep passes, they went to Sky Moore. It wasn't Sky Moore in the slot getting open underneath. It was 2 deep shots to Sky Moore. To me, if they're going to go into this season with the mindset they're just going to go back to gunslinging, defenses are ready for that. They're not giving Mahomes the big play. So all that said, and I think you already said a good bit of this, but I certainly want you to add more if you do. I think Mahomes is maybe the quarterback 6, maybe 7, but he's not the quarterback 3. Thoughts, Billy?
He's actually quarterback 6 in my rankings. It's funny
Yep.
you mentioned that. So you look at this offense. I mentioned earlier the amount of turnover they've had, and I'm a big believer in vacated targets and teams hitting a rhythm and being able to move the ball. They have 345 vacated targets in this offense. 54. This is number one in the league, by the way. 54% of their target share is up for grabs this year. 54%. That is astronomically high, and it's just going to take some time to adjust. It really is. And I agree with you. The 50-yard touchdown year is driving the price up. It's also just the sentiment people have in their head is Patrick Mahomes, the best quarterback in the league. It's Andy Reid, it's the Chiefs. They're going to dominate, right? And let's face it. There's a lot of quarterbacks out there who are in now maybe potentially better situations. Herbert might be one of them, but Lamar Jackson for me this year is number 2 in quarterbacks because of rushing attempts.
Yes.
And so, I've Mahomes as my quarterback 6. So I'm not crazy high on him either, and I'm not taking him at cost.
Yeah, exactly. Be quarterback 6 as well. Billy, you have one more player here that we're going to talk about your under cost on. Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's currently going in the last 3 days wide receiver 21. Yep. Wow, pick number 49. Billy, give the case against Amon-Ra St. Brown.
I mean, this is going to be a pretty short one. It's yes. You look at everything this offense had last year and what they have this year, right? Last year he broke out as a rookie, which he had a phenomenal rookie year, and one could argue that that's going to carry over here in 2022. But Swift was injured. Even Jamal Williams was injured. Hawkinson was injured. They really had nobody else in the field outside of Amon-Ra St. Brown. So it was just based on necessity that he was getting the amount of volume that he got. And you look at like his metrics and you say, oh, he had the number 6 in the slot reps at 488. He was his route participation, he was out there all the time. Well, yes, he had to be out there all the time. No one else was out there. But if you look at all his other metrics out there, like his ADOT or his air yards or his red zone opportunities, his deep targets, all of them are below wide receiver 50. And so there's a lot of red flags in terms of his efficiencies when you add in all the competition for targets now, and I think how this offense is going to move the ball, there's just a lot of hesitance for me to take him at wide receiver 21. I mean, he helped me win a lot of those leagues that we started off in the beginning. I mean, I probably won $50,000 last year because of Amon-Ra St. Brown and me drafting him in drafts and just sitting on him, or I picked him up off the waiver wire in a league or two. So, I'm not biased against him. He helped me win a lot of money. It's just, it breaks down to necessity last year and efficiencies. And is that going to be able to carry over here in 2022? So like I said, I have hesitation towards drafting him. I still draft him because I think it's important to have that ownership and diversify your portfolio in fantasy, but I'm not going out and smashing him every round like I am when I see someone like Cole Kmet fall to me in like round 10 or 11, right? There's certain players that you just insta-lock if they fall to you, and that's not Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Exactly. And everything you said, correct. I mean, you mentioned DeAndre Swift, TJ Hawkinson. They're competing for the same types of targets. It's not like DeAndre Swift is just the check down screen guy. He'll actually run routes. And so those are all in the same target share. And like you mentioned, Swift was back for 2 games late, but his snaps were really decreased. They weren't using him much. They were spotting him for this year. And Hawkinson broke his thumb. And so those numbers down the stretch, he was getting 10 to 12 targets a game. And everything, there was like no floor. He was like all roof. And it was just a perfect storm. And betting on that again is rough. And if like you're in on DJ Chark, and if you're in on DJ Chark, you have to be out, right? Because if Chark's going to get a good percentage of passes, like we said, we still got other players. So the pie is just going to be diminished. So yeah, I'm out on him as well. Last year was great. And one thing I want to mention to the listeners, Billy brings up a great point. In this industry, it's very important to not have take lock. We may be high on a player one year, but we reevaluate every single player every year because situations always change in the NFL. Schemes change, players change, injuries happen, and there's fallout of all these things. And so we understand that if we had a player ranked highly last year, maybe not next year, maybe, but it all depends on circumstance. Billy, anything you want to tell the audience about that idea of avoiding take lock?
Yeah, I'd even say it happens week to week, right? You look at, that's why we play DFS. That's why we look at our seasons and we're making start sit calls. I mean, There was a 10K league where I was starting Igwabuki last year. Like, who the hell would do that, right? Me, I'm crazy, right? But it was
Nope.
he had opportunity share, right? And you take a look at, you got to look at scenarios, and you got to look at, I mean, there's coaching changes middle of the season. And when there's coaching changes in the middle of the season, that offense is going to change in the middle of the season. And so what's going to happen is those players are going to see different looks now. And so I 100% agree with you not to get locked in the player on one season, let alone, week to week. So things change weekly in the NFL, right? The NFL stands for not for long. And so you have to know that player may dominate one year, and the next year they may completely fall off. And yes, there's outliers, and people are consistently in the top 10, but players that are spiking into the top 12 in the first year or top 20 may not necessarily be the scenario for year two.
Now, Billy, when you mentioned week to week, absolutely correct. We have to make adjustments all the time. On my Saturday XM show, I have two segments in the middle, and basically it's player trends. And I look at what the player has been doing. And obviously, early in the season, you don't have much to go on. But once you get to those middle weeks, I'm looking at a number of weeks. I'm checking the trends. I'm watching the film, and I'm making decisions as to which players are going to begin to trend down and which are going to be trend up. You do the same thing. And it is that volatile of a market. And if you're missing out on that volatility, it may not be your deal. That's okay. But for Billy and I, it's a way of life because, again, winning a season, it's not about just winning the draft. It's about making micro decisions throughout the season. So I think that's important to know. Now, we don't know who left the room and who didn't. So at this point, I'll say if somebody has a question, drop it in, and Billy and I can answer that. In the meantime, Billy, tell people what you've got going on, how they can find you, and you got to follow him at FF Muzio, correct? I have that right, Muzio.
That's right. Yeah,
you got to follow Billy if you're not on it. Go ahead, Billy. Tell people where they can find you, what you got cooking these days.
So I'm at Full-Time Fantasy. All my rankings are over there. I also have the ranking tiered sheet, which I'm going to update tonight. The rankings in general, I've been updating probably every few days. I've been under the weather the last couple of days, so I've been behind on updating the tiered sheet, but I do plan on updating that tonight. I have my new fade list probably coming out towards probably next weekend, to be honest, as we get into the masses drafting the draft season. We call it tour season at the FFWC. And then I'm pretty much in every high stakes room you can find. I would be between now and week one. I got about 2 drafts a day in the high stakes community, whether it's a world championship main event or a player pro for a championship or 10K league once we get into Vegas. So hope to see you if you want to come out and draft with us. We're going to be in Vegas at the MGM drafting for the FFWC. It's a fun site because we are 3 wide receiver starts and you're starting 11 on offense instead of the 10 that you see at most sites, so it adds another layer of difficulty, and it's not for the faint of heart. So we welcome you to draft with us over at FFWC and come join us in Vegas.
Now, Billy, we'll see if anybody has a couple of questions. Crackshot asks, who's going to be the wide receiver one for Casey and for Green Bay?
I think that for Green Bay is probably the toughest team to project right now. If you sat down and do the math, it can really go any way. So let's start with Kansas City as I continue to give myself time for Green Bay. But Kansas City is going to be Juju Smith-Schuster in the slot. I think that's a pretty clear. He's been dominating camp. Mahomes likes to throw across the field anyways, and I think that's going to really benefit. I think it's going to benefit Juju. In Green Bay, I'm going to say Lazard probably leads the team in target share. Probably going to say number 2 is going to be Aaron Jones.
Yes.
And number 3 is going to be Romeo Doubs. And I have been touting Romeo since April. If you go back and look at my tweets, I right when they drafted Doubs, I said Doubs over Watson. And I'm going to stick to that take. I loved his tape, and I know that people are going to bring up the Senior Bowl. He was hurt, and he didn't play to his full potential there, and didn't have everything to give. So love what he has done so far through camp. Love what he's done in preseason. I think it's going to carry over. And so I think that he could easily be the number 2 receiver, but probably number 3 in the passing game.
Oh, I got a bad joke now. Velus Jones, I should name the Senior Bowl after him. Sorry. Sorry, man. All right. And you know what? I want to just, before we go to the next question, you mentioned Aaron Jones. And I fully believe that both Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon are going to be on the field at the same time together a lot. Aaron Jones, I believe we'll see him lined up as the outside receiver in the slot, run routes out of the backfield. Look, those years Alvin Kamara was dominating as a receiver, Jones will be used differently, but Jones has that Alvin Kamara type season and maybe even better. I'm not going to say that Alvin Kamara is more talented than Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones just hasn't been used to his potential. He's been used judiciously, but he's never been deployed to the full extent of his weaponry. So I'm excited for him. But I love that you mentioned Aaron Jones. He's going to be a major deal, Billy.
Well, you look at his splits with Devontae Adams on and off the field, and this is going from 2017 2021. Yes. His PPR points go from 14.8 to 22.89.
Yep,
with Devontae
8.8 up.
Yep, and you look at his receptions, they almost double, 2.49 to 4.5, and his rushing yards remain constant. So I'm really high on Jones this year as well.
Yeah, it's funny. We did that same thing because the 8.8 points per game boost, it was incredible. But yeah, great call on that. And we don't care it's a small sample size because we realize Aaron Jones, aside from Aaron Rodgers, is probably the best offensive weapon they have, and they have to use him. Julia, see your comment there. Thank you for being with us. You just made some nice positive comments. Thank you. Dave, Billy, do you have a late round guy that you're hoping to get in every draft besides DJ Chark?
Yeah. And I'm going to go later. So when I say late, I'm going to say rounds like 15 through 20.
Yes.
Okay? I consider, rounds 9 through 14, those mid rounds. I think those win leagues, but these ones win leagues too. And it's going to be Kyle Phillips. Kyle Phillips from Tennessee has been dominating camp out of the slot. He's uncoverable pretty much, in my opinion. And I think they just announced today that he is pretty much won the wide receiver 3 job in Tennessee. He's also returning kicks or punts, I should say, which also adds to the potential for fantasy points.
Yes.
And if he does, go out and let's just say he's the number 2. Like right now they called for 2 wide receiver sets, and he was out there with Bob Woods. So I think that Kyle Phillips in late round stabs, like I was getting him around 20 a couple weeks ago. He's up around 16s now, but even at around 16, 17, someone who potentially could be the number 2, number 3 option inside this offense is going to be a win.
Billy, I want to make sure fantasy managers understand if you're looking up Kyle Phillips, it's 1L. Because if you're typing him in, if you're going into your draft room trying to type to find him, you're not going to be typing if you type in the typical spelling of Phillips. 1L. But yes, with UCLA, right? I believe.
He was UCLA, and he had like a 30% target share in college.
Yes, and man, he is like that prototypical slot guy. I mean, I'm not saying he's Cooper Kupp or Wes Welker, but, you could make a case where this guy could kind of be on that same line. So that's a phenomenal call. Kyle Phillips late in your drafts. Octavio, I'm sorry if I said your name wrong, asked, can you talk about Mike Williams? He had him last year, 5 great games, and then not so good. He actually finished decently. But Billy, thoughts on Mike Williams?
Yeah, I still think they're still running the Lombardi system. It's still going to benefit his role in this offense. Keenan Allen's now at that age cliff time where Mike Williams could surpass him. I have him actually pretty close in targets this year. I don't have Keenan Allen above 150 targets, which is where we've seen him at. Mike Williams this year in my projections are 131 targets, 78 receptions, 1,145 yards, and 7.5 scores. Yes, I added half scores for projections. That way you miss either way, you're only half off. And then but that puts him as wide receiver 15. So a lot of expectations. He's got one of the best quarterbacks, arguably throwing him the ball in the league. One of the best divisions in football as well. Should have a lot of shootout games. So I'm very high in Mike Williams as long as he can stay healthy, because we all know Mike Williams is the only player in the NFL that can land on his head and his butt in the same play. So there's always, every time he goes up and gets the ball, I kind of grimace, right? How's he coming down? And so if he can stay healthy, I'd say, there's potential for double-digit touchdowns.
Josh Palmer is slowish. Keenan Allen, obviously, is a slot guy that runs a lot of those routes. Mike Williams, when they did deploy him as a downfield weapon, he wins those 50-50 balls. And I think, like we said, early in the season, they used him properly. Late in the season, this year, I think they do it for the whole season. Billy, I think it's a great call on him. And then Julia said, finally has a dance partner to go to the prom with Romeo. Oh, she likes Romeo Dubs as well. Sounds good. Crack shot. Hackett is gone. Are they running the same system on offense?
No.
That's it. Simple. Done. We don't need to answer anymore. Thanks, Dave. NWI is my guy.
Nick Westbrook at Keene. No, he's not going to be the number 1. No.
No.
I want what Julia's smoking.
Well, lots of states it's legal. Just kidding. All right, Rod, you drafted Dalvin Cook, Aaron Jones, Brees Hall, and Pierce. I assume you mean Damian Pierce. Glad to hear this about Jones. Yes, absolutely. And Octavio said thank you. And Billy, I'd like to thank you. You know, the most important thing is we talked football. I believe we became friends. Dude, I'm excited to get to know you. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot more, but we'll definitely see each other in Canton next year, but hopefully a lot more before then. You are the man. Follow him at FF Muzio. And Billy is just going to keep dominating those high-stakes drafts. Find him. Find his stuff. Follow him. Billy, I appreciate you, man.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Everybody have a great night, and we'll talk to you soon.
Good night, everybody.